How are we doing, Jets fans? I'm Glenn Naughton with JetNation Radio, JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. Draft day is just about here, folks. We're 48 hours away, whatever it may be from this point. And as you heard Darren Mougey say today, and you hear other GMs say it, by this point, your board is done. There may be some very fine tuning, some tweaking, little stuff like that, but not nothing major at this point going down inside the front offices of these teams. Mougey saying that he feels comfortable with where the Jets are at right now from a talent perspective. Says he's very happy with where the board is and ready to roll. He met with the media today and going to be joined today, by the way, a good friend Scott Mason has just logged in. How we doing there, Scott?
Hey, what's up, Glenn? Anything you know of that's going on around the NFL right now? Anything important happening?
No, nothing worth talking about. Nothing on the docket. Exciting, man. It's we're 48 hours away from this thing kicking off.
Yeah.
I'm still, I'm just at the point now where I'm trying to find UDFA types that I haven't watched yet. Just to get, even if I watch one game of a guy, just to get an idea.
Yeah.
Even though most of these guys won't get drafted, but you want to know the UDFAs when the draft wraps up. So that's where I'm at right now. I know you probably heard the Darren Mougey presser earlier today. I'll just kind of recap it real quick for those of you who didn't catch it. So Mougey said he feels good about the talent on the roster. And listen, as is the case with all these things, it's a lot of nothing. No GM's going to go up there and go, yeah, we're in rough shape. Like this team isn't very good and we got a lot of work to do. So Mougey, he says he's happy with the roster, feels good with where the board is at. For what's left for him now, he said he's going to do his due diligence, call all 31 teams, see who's looking to move up, who's looking to move back. As he said, all teams will be doing right now. He was asked a couple questions about Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers' comments last week about how the Jets didn't handle things professionally. He said, basically, I'm here to talk about the draft and current Jets players. Respectfully said, look, I understand why you're asking the question, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Again, you can almost write this script for every GM/head coach when they take over. What type of players are you looking for? Physical, smart, tough, aggressive, resilient. Like I'm waiting for the day where we're like, below average intelligence. We want some guys who are pretty passive and polite. Not looking to hurt anybody out there. It's all just about what do they say? It's what's the saying they say with kids, right? With the oh yeah, not whether you win or lose, right? How you play the game. Every GM says the same thing. Physical, violent. That was Robert Saleh's big buzzword. We want violent players, right? Physical, violent, whatever. One decent question he was asked, how are they breaking the ties when him and Aaron Glenn disagree on a player? And he said, we just watch film and we watch more and talk and watch until we get on the same page and find some common ground on a player. And asked, I like this question because it's, again, even though I knew the answer wouldn't be great, this one came from Dan Leberfeld. And being familiar with Dan's writing and his style, and he's a guy who's been around for a while, I'd be willing to bet money Dan didn't love the idea of not having a competition at quarterback. And so he asked Mougey what went into that, the thought process behind handing the job to Justin Fields and not letting somebody compete for the job. And Mougey just said, we feel good about him at quarterback and we basically were handing him the job. And he says you always want competition, but at this spot we were happy. So there will be no competition. The job belongs to Justin Fields before a snap is taken. Side note today, also floating around on the Twitter sphere, tight end Tyler Warren did come in for a visit with the Jets on the radar with the 7th pick. Any thoughts on the presser, Scott? As I said, nothing earth-shattering, nothing that you take out of that and go, oh, wow, that's...
The only two things that I thought of during the press conference were, first of all, they made the right decision to keep their mouths shut about the Rodgers thing. The more they talk about it, the more it's a story, the more it's out there. There's nothing to be gained. The old front office and coaching staff would have felt personally hurt and leaked some stuff in retaliation, I'm sure. Mougey and Glenn are going to take the high road. They're going to let this story die down, and I think it's the smart move. Listen, I don't think any of us who aren't for whatever reason, like complete Rodgers loyalist. I don't think any of us believe at face value the story that Rodgers told. I'm sure that he embellished or straight up fabricated some of the details as he's been prone to do. Some of it may have been true, whatever, but there's no positive to the Jets going back and forth. And the other nugget that I didn't think I heard you mention, but I think this was the only real newsworthy thing that I thought that really came out of this was that Mougey more or less said that Jermaine Johnson, Sauce, and Garrett Wilson, all three of them will have their fifth-year options picked up. Now, Sauce and Wilson, we all knew, but JJ, because of the injury, was more of a question mark, but he more or less said, yeah, we're picking that option up. So that is slightly newsworthy, and that was pretty much it. There really wasn't much to that press conference, man. It was your usual paint by numbers. They're not going to give anything away right before the draft.
Yeah, that was going to be the one major story coming out of it. You obviously just spoke on it. That I was going to touch on, and you're right. The JJ thing was surprising, not shocking, but I really thought coming off the injury they'd kind of, and I don't think any player would really have any gripe with that. I mean, you would understand a team's position that you're coming off a major injury, rather than commit to big money. We want to see what you can do, but they commit to him. I don't have a problem with that at all. Again, Sauce and Garrett, you expect it, and I would imagine they'll, as soon as possible, potentially right after the draft, they can get to work on some extensions for these guys to keep them around long term. Now, JJ would be the one guy. I don't think he's going to see a long term deal until he plays this season. But that rolls us right into the next topic, Scott. So Dylan Terman and I did our show last week or 4 days ago, however long it was, and we talked about the fact that this team, one thing that we felt is being overlooked, one thing I felt was being overlooked. I said weeks ago, don't rule out the possibility of Shamar Stewart at 7. Like, he's my dark horse. And admittedly, I was probably, and look, he still might be the guy. But thinking about it today and a couple days ago, I was like, oh man, I'm probably putting too much weight on the Texas A&M connection with Aaron Glenn being an alum and him being from there. But looking at Aaron Glenn's defense in Detroit, like, they had guys who could get after the quarterback. They had edge guys. The Jets right now, they've got Will McDonald, who, again, if they're going to go 4-3 or, four-man front predominantly, you can live with that. Again, Aaron Glenn, his ends tended to be 260 plus, whereas Will McDonald is 235, 240. So you wonder if he's going to fit the scheme. But as I think I said the other day, assuming best case scenario and he fits what they're going to do, you still have Will McDonald and you've got Jermaine Johnson coming back from a ruptured Achilles, and that's it on the edge. So if you're going to think Aaron Glenn, a defensive-minded head coach, isn't looking at these edge guys, and the reason I bring this up is because NFL insider Todd McShay said on his show, I don't know if it aired today or yesterday. I listened to it today. It may have aired yesterday. But McShay said the edge class as a whole and what's going to happen here, he feels, is being undersold. And he's saying that he could see as many as 7 edge rushers going in the top 17. And he named the Jets, the Raiders, potentially the Saints, and several other clubs who could make that move. And I saw you sent out a tweet a little while ago, Scott, about with that thought that there could be an edge guy, and there's a lot of it's got to be Tyler Warren or it's got to be Membu to solidify the O line once and for all, or it's got to be Warren because he helps as a pass catcher and a blocker, so he helps your run game and it gives Fields a weapon. But Aaron Glenn could be looking at this thing saying, look, there's plenty of depth at tight end. We can grab a receiver later on. So we're not taking a T-Mac or a Luther Burden. I mean, Burden at 7 probably wasn't going to happen anyway. But edge, again, we brought it up last week. I think it's a bigger possibility than folks are realizing, and hearing McShay today just kind of drove that home a little bit more for me. And I thought, I don't think we're far off by saying don't rule out edge at 7, because not a lot of people are talking about that.
Well, Glenn, it's funny because not only did you hear that from McShay, but you heard something similar if you read Bruce Feldman's piece in the New York Times, which is outstanding. I would recommend subscribing to the New York Times just for this month so you could get Bruce Feldman's stuff and obviously everything from The Beast, which is the big draft guide that everybody should be checking out. By the way, that thing is over 600 pages, which is absolutely amazing. Brugler does an
It's
incredible
it's
job.
incredible.
But what Feldman did was he surveyed something like 30 people from across the league that were in positions of significance, whether it was a scout, a coach, a personnel man, whatever it was. And he asked about all these different players and the position groups and all these things. And like I said, it's a really long, fascinating read over at the New York Times. And one thing that he said is that, much like McShay sort of hinted, the teams are bullish on the defensive line guys, the edge rushers, the interior guys, as well as the safeties. They really like the safeties in this class. One of the guys who was quoted said something like, if you are in the market for a starting safety, this is the draft for you because you could get one in like the first 5 rounds of the draft or something like that. But they're very down on the quarterback position. They're very down on the wide receiver group. In fact, in Feldman's piece, several of the guys, apparently it's about 50-50 in terms of which of them liked McMillan number one as receiver and Golden as number one. But they all agreed that in most drafts, they would consider these guys way further down, nowhere near the top 10. And they both believe that, or most of them, I should say, both camps, the Golden and McMillan camps, both believe that this is a draft filled with number two caliber receivers. They don't see these guys as surefire number ones. They're down on the offensive line group. In fact, you heard what McShay said in his podcast that a lot of the guys he talked to said that the top tackles don't belong anywhere near the top 10. And Bruce Feldman, the people that he talked to, they seem to indicate that. In fact, several of the people quoted seem to believe that both Will Campbell and Armin Mambu might be better off at guard. So that's telling you something about where the league is at as far as these guys go. And this is why I think it's really good to get. And I mean, no disrespect to Todd McShay. When he was at ESPN, he didn't really do this type of reporting because it wasn't what ESPN wanted from him. But now you're getting more of the details. And this is what's good because, look, it's nice to get these guys' evaluations and all of that. But we can watch stuff on our own. And there are plenty of people doing that. What McShay and guys like Bruce Feldman and Daniel Jeremiah really bring to the table is they have sources all over the league. So they can give you an idea of what the people not watching the tape for draft websites think, or guys like us, they can give you a glimpse into the minds of the guys that are actually going to be having a hand in making these decisions. And so, look, obviously there's smoke screens going on, but I thought that was interesting that, like you said, Glenn, it seems like they believe that the majority of the value at the top here, once you get past the three guys that everybody knows are almost certainly going to go the top three, Cam Ward, uh, Travis Hunter, and Abdul Carter, that the value is almost entirely in those defensive line players, the tackles and the edge rushers. And so, like McShay said, and Feldman's piece, when you read between the lines with what these guys that he quoted are saying, it seems like this is going to be a draft that's heavy on those players. Now, last year, it was a very different draft. You had a very strong offensive line class, you had a very strong wide receiver class. This year, it's the reverse. You didn't have a lot of defensive tackles or edge rushers going near the top last year. I think Laiatu Latu was the first one, and he was like 15th or something.
Yeah.
This year, it's going to be the reverse, where you could see a receiver not go until that point, or even maybe a tackle. Although some people believe that Will Campbell may go forth just out of pure need because the Patriots are kind of screwed. They got to get somebody to protect Drake May. But the point is, this is a draft where the value is there, according to the people in the league at those spots. So you look at that and you see what Mougey and Glenn said their mission is. It's not 2025. It's adding foundational pieces that can be here for 5, 10 years. And so are they going to want to reach on an offensive player that they think isn't anywhere near as good as one of the defensive players that they can get? I'm not so sure they would do that. I think there's a decent chance that they would go edge rusher or interior defensive lineman here. Mason Graham, if he's on the board, could be one of the guys that you see. You talked about the edge guys. Maybe someone like Shamar Stewart. Maybe someone like Jalen Walker, who's not a pure edge, but somebody that is sort of that hybrid. There that you hear about a bunch of the other players as well. Derek Harmon from Oregon. I don't know about at 7, but he's a guy that's getting a lot of talk as well. So I think that's what's going on now is that you like you said, you may very well see a run on the edge and the interior players. And yes, it is a deep interior class, but that said, there is obviously a difference between, I mean, I would think in the minds of these draft evaluators between Mason Graham and say, I'm trying to think of a defense, TJ Sanders or somebody like that who you could get in the second or third round.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna go over some of my favorites in this class as a whole at each position. We didn't discuss whether or not you have a hard out, Scott. If you can't do the whole thing, that's totally fine. But the one interesting thing I just wanted to throw out there because we've talked about him a little bit, and you said you listened to the episode. For anyone who didn't hear it, the most surprising thing to me that McShay said, and again, keeping in mind this could all be smoke screens because of course teams want people to think things that aren't true. So this could be a complete lie. But my thought on Shedeur Sanders is that the worst case scenario for him was he goes to Pittsburgh at 21. And then when Derek Carr got hurt, you think if he falls to 9, New Orleans might grab him. So it was like in my mind it was 9 or 21. Probably realizing that was the conventional wisdom. McShay addressed both of those, saying not only will the Saints not take Shedeur at 9, they won't take him at 40 if he's still there.
Yeah.
They don't want him. And he said Pittsburgh, while Mike Tomlin does like him, he does not like him enough to take him at 21. So that could be the smokescreen.
Well,
But
that's the interesting thing, Glenn, is that between what McShay said and then if you read the Bruce Feldman article, they talk a ton about the quarterbacks in this draft. And what you see is they all say the same thing about Cam Ward. They say, Cam Ward, this guy's got all the tools. There's a few things you want to clean up. His ball security has been an issue. Not as much at Miami, but we've seen it over the years. At Washington State, he fumbled a lot and all that. But he's a guy that they seem to say, okay, if he was in last year's draft, he's the third quarterback off the board after Daniels and Caleb Williams. But
right.
when you talk about the other guys, it's very split. A lot of teams are very nervous about Jackson Dart. There are teams that say they think he has talent, but that he has a lot of work to do. And there were a couple that talked about how they didn't love his performances in some of the top games that he played in. And the Florida game, our mutual friend Emery Hunt talked about how disastrous that one was on his tape. And Shedeur Sanders is another one where you see a lot of them saying, well, he's a guy that I think might be able to be a decent starter, but I just don't know that he has a ceiling to be worth such and such pick and all that. And I thought this tells you a lot about this draft class, Glenn, in terms of the quarterbacks. One of the one of the guys who I think was a personnel director was quoted as saying something along the lines of, I think Dart's better than Sanders. He's got a better arm. He's a better athlete, so on and so forth. But I would compare him to Drew Lock. So, like, if you're talking about, okay, this is a guy that you have as QB2 in this draft, and you think he's Drew Lock, it doesn't speak all that highly for the quarterback talent. And Milrow, in the article Bruce Feldman talked to these guys, and a lot of them said the same thing about Milrow. Sky high upside because of his arm and his athletic ability, but basically, all they're confident he can do right now is run and throw the ball deep. And there's a lot that goes into the quarterback position that they're like, well, I don't know if this guy, one of the guys, I think he was a quarterback coach that was quoted, said, I'd love to get my hands on a guy like that. But then somebody else said something along the lines of, everybody has the bravado of thinking they can be the one to fix him or they can be the one to make him whatever. And a
Yeah.
lot of times it just doesn't work out that way more often than not. So maybe you're kidding yourself if you do that, but it's just funny because that's where people are at with this. It's like, well, maybe Dart could become something, but he's going to take a lot of work. Well, maybe Milrow could become something because he's got all this ability, but he's going to take a lot of work. Sanders, maybe he could turn into something, but we don't think his ceiling is very high. So this is just not the year for quarterbacks. If you wanted a quarterback, you should have tanked and finished with the worst record like the Titans.
Yeah, because it really does. I mean, the Shedeur thing, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see. There are some folks, I can't remember exactly who it was, but CBS Sports did a 7-round mock the other day, and I listened to bits and pieces of that. Almost all of it, but focused obviously on the Jets picks. But I forget which analyst said There would be some teams, depending on what they run, you could see it. You could see Dart going before Shador. But then there are some who say that's absolutely nuts. Joel Klatt, I saw earlier. I didn't watch the video, but I saw the snippet saying he thinks Shador is QB1. Emery Hunt has Shador. He might have him at QB1 as well.
Yeah.
So there
He
are some,
does.
there are some evaluators out there who really think he's the top guy. But
It's
these other analysts,
incredibly, yeah, it's incredibly divisive, Glenn. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. Sanders is so divisive. There's such a wide range of opinions on him. It's crazy.
Albert Breer said the other day he couldn't find a GM that would say they thought he was worth a first round pick. So we'll find out in a couple days, right?
Yeah.
You could see a team trading up maybe to 32 and do what the Ravens did with Lamar.
Mm-hmm.
If a team is sitting there, 37, 38, 39, and they feel like they'd like him and get that 50-year option.
Right.
We'll see what happens there. Thomas says in the chat, Mougey implied a trade down today. I wouldn't go that far, Thomas. He did say, and I said at the top that he was going to call all 31 teams as he always does. And he said more teams are always looking to move back than to move up. Teams are more receptive to that because everybody wants more picks.
Yep.
So everybody, sure, we'll move back 5 or 6 spots if it gets us an extra pick. But absolutely, if the Jets if they can move back, it's not like they won't be able to get a good player.
Mm-hmm.
One guy I just wanted to mention real quick, talking to the DTs, I believe it was Schefter. Schefter wrote a rap sheet the other day. I didn't get to see who the author because I was sort of on the move and I just clicked the list and went through a few names. It must have been an ESPN, analyst said like, they've ranked their top 100 players. Here's the list. I didn't even go through the whole list, but the one that jumped out at me, what I just said, wow, this is a good player. This is a guy, every single mock I did, a few months ago, he was consistently my second round pick in the early 40s. This guy had him ranked 5th best player in the class. Walter Nolan, DT out of Mississippi.
Wow.
Or Ole Miss. 5th in the class. I mean, he's a really good player. I did also, though, I believe it was McShay who said there may be some character concerns there. So maybe that's why he's not getting top 10 hype. But like I said, he's a very good player. Even when I was getting him in the second round, he's one of those you're doing and you're saying it's kind of silly because he's not going to be there when the actual draft happens.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see what happens with that. See, we got a few more minutes here with you, Scott, before you got to roll out. Any thoughts, beyond round one, of course, that's what everybody wants to talk about. I'm going to go over some of my guys here at every spot who I like. Anyone you want to throw out there, day 2, day 3, round 7, whatever it may be. Guys that not everybody's talking about.
Yeah. So this is my ideal Jets draft. You ready for this, Glenn?
Go ahead.
Okay. First round, Kelvin Banks, offensive tackle, University of Texas. Second round, Alfred Collins, defensive tackle, University of Texas. Third round, Andrew Mukuba, safety, University of Texas. Fourth round, Gunnar Helm, tight end, University of Texas. All right. All seriousness.
That would actually not be a bad draft.
No, it would not. And
that would, for those of you unaware, Scott might be a Texas long fan.
Jake Majors. But that
would not be a bad class.
Jake Majors in the 5th round. He's a good player. Jaden Blue in the 7th round.
I was going to say, where are you taking Jaden Blue?
Jaden Blue, maybe 6th or 7th round. And then you got Baron Sorrell, the linebacker, could be a 6th or 7th round pick. So you could do an entire draft of Texas players. All seriousness, though, a couple of guys I like. Glenn, I know you watch all these off the beaten path guys, but I just started looking at Darian Porter, and he's a really interesting one to me. 6-year senior, converted wide receiver. And I know he's a little bit older, but he's 6'3", 200 pounds, ran a sub 440. And in his only year as a cornerback, he was honorable mention all Big 12. He's one of those guys where you could sort of see if he got the right coaching with his physical tools, he could really turn into something. Some people have compared him to Reek Woolen. Obviously, people will talk about Richard Sherman, who is another guy that converted late. I don't know that he's going to be that good, but that's a really fascinating player to me. Andrew Mukuba, who I just mentioned before, the safety for Texas. Look, he's not going to be the greatest tackler of all time, but I think you can refine his tackling technique. He's a really good coverage guy. I think he could be that sort of deep center field type, sort of, if you remember what Kerry Rhodes was for this team. And Kerry Rhodes at one point was a second team All-Pro. I think Makuba could be a really good one. I love the idea of grabbing a safety in this draft because, as we said, this
You
is a
got it.
draft for safeties, and Aaron Glenn obviously did great work with safeties in Detroit. Getting a guy like Porter, a developmental corner who could probably go in the third or fourth round, there's an example. There's a lot of guys. How about Luke Lachey, right? If the Jets pick a tight end early, you could get someone like Lachey late. His father, by the way, was a really good player in the NFL in his own right. Lachey's an excellent blocker. So, I mean, if you think about it, if you run that offense where you have whoever the receiving threat is, and then you have Lachey as just your blocking tight end that you get late in the draft, that's an interesting guy to think about. Running backs, I know there's a million of them. Jaden Blue, I like a lot for obvious reasons as a
Yeah.
Texas guy. As a late guy, if you decide you want to move Brees Hall, I don't know if that they're going to do that. You know who hasn't gotten enough talk, and I think he's probably going to go too early for the Jets. But how about Tate Ratledge? Look at what he did
Yeah.
in the SEC, and look at his measurements and the way he tested at the combine. I'm shocked that he's a guard, by the way. I'm shocked he hasn't gotten more talk. I really like him. Um, the kid from Oregon State, whose name is escaping me right now, he's also an offensive guard. Why am I drawing a blank on him, Glenn? You know what I'm talking about, the guard from Oregon State. I don't know why I'm
Gray.
drawing a blank. Gray, yes. He's
Yeah.
another one that I think could be a late round gem. I think, look, the main need for the Jets on the O line is tackle, but they need depth at guard. AVT has gotten hurt plenty. John Simpson going into the last year of his contract, he hasn't re signed yet. You want depth there. I know they got Myers, but Myers is on a cheap 1 year deal. So Gray is a really good possibility in the late rounds. I think he could be an interesting one. Nick Nash, the receiver from San Jose State. I know he's older, but
Yeah. I only got onto him, not to cut you off. I got
yeah,
into
yeah,
him a few weeks ago, and I was loving everything I saw. And I brought him up in the forums in JetNation, and
yeah.
somebody was like, "Yeah, that dude's like 37," and I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
damn."
Look, he is 25, but if you get him in like the fifth round or whatever, which is
Hey,
around
I
where
would
he's
still take him.
projected,
I
so
would still
what?
take him.
Yeah. Why
Yeah,
not? I mean, because think about it. Even if you only get one contract out of the guy in the fifth
for fifth
round, it's
round.
worth the deal, you know? And Marcus Johnson, who does really good Raiders film breakdowns, was profiling him. And I believe he compared him to, damn, another one I'm drawing a blank on. He was the number 3 receiver for the Bengals all those years with the
TJ
two.
Houshmandzadeh?
No,
Oh, he was the two with
more recent. Why am I drawing a blank? You know who I'm talking about. He just left recently. Oh man, he was the third guy with Chase,
oh,
and you know who I'm talking about.
I do. I can't think of
Man,
the
I
name,
don't
but I
know
know what
why I
you're talking
can't
about.
come up with it right now, but yeah, when you look it up later, you'll see. But like that was a good comparison. So I think those are a couple of the guys just off the top of my head that are interesting sleeper-ish types. Oh, David Walker. Obviously, David Walker, one of my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah,
guys.
yeah.
You and I have talked about him. He's a guy that I think might be there around the fourth round. Now, another older guy, 24, 25. And I know he played against smaller school competition, but you watch his tape and he just leaps out at you. He's the type of guy. I know Rick Spielman compared him to Brandon Graham,
Brandon
but
Graham. Yeah,
I think he could be a really effective pass rusher. And he's the type that I think Steve Wilkes and Aaron Glenn would do well with. By the way, really quickly, Glenn, before I run, I will say this. Just to punctuate all this, I think that no matter whether it's round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, Aaron Glenn and those guys, they're looking for culture fits. They want guys that are high character, high motor, guys that are willing to be coached, guys that eat, breathe, and sleep football, the whole thing. That's the type of guys that they're looking for. And so bear that in mind when you're thinking about players at whatever position that the Jets might consider. So yeah, there's a couple of sleepers that I like, and that's sort of where I think the Jets might be heading. Oh, last thing, real quick. Jade Barron. I saw that there was talk about him. McShay brought him up as a possibility for the Jets. So did Schefter. A lot of people losing their minds. Oh my God, they could take a corner. We talked about this a second ago. It's really all about getting pieces. And what I think people are missing here is Barron, his dimensions are more along the lines of a Trent McDuffie. He's got shorter arms. He's not going to be a boundary corner in the NFL. I don't think he's necessarily even going to be a slot. I think what Aaron Glenn might like about him is he may see him as a Kyle Hamilton type, a safety who could do, or a hybrid safety slash a little bit of corner who can do a little bit of everything and be that special, I guess, jack of all trades types. I think if that's if Glenn is indeed high on Barron, that would be what he's thinking. That's my guess based on what I know of Jahdae Barron from watching him play at Texas and from the measurements and from what the Jets have on the roster right now, because obviously they have resources tied up at boundary and slot. So I don't think that if Glenn likes him, it would be because he thinks he's going to take one of those jobs. I think he would be seeing him as more of that, like I said, Kyle Hamilton-ish type of player. So that's my last thought for you, Glenn. Thank you so much for having me on, and I'm looking forward to doing the draft shows with you, man. We're gonna have a lot of fun. We're gonna be up late, but we're gonna have a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to cover every pick this year, and then I'm gonna hop on Scott until like a jet after each day of the draft. How we doing in the chat, guys? Wild Wave Thomas wasn't ignoring you guys. Wanted to get those comments in from him. You mentioned Jalen Walker, Wild Wave. The interesting comment today from McShay was that, as he was covering the topic of everybody wanting an edge rusher or expecting an early run on edge rushers, he said, note on Jalen Walker, everybody wants him. And then he went on to name 6-7 teams that he thought would take an edge. And I believe he started with Oakland. Las Vegas. So if Vegas wants an edge, then excuse me, then that could be where Walker goes. If they don't, if they take Gianti, which some people have guessed, help that running game, Pete Carroll, give him his Marshawn Lynch. If they do that, then maybe the Jets go Walker. If not, there will be some other guys on the board. I see Thomas here saying we can trade down to 10, still land Membu. They could. Listen, moving down is a possibility. The thing is, I don't feel as confident about it now, listening to what McShay was saying earlier, the point Scott was making just now. Not the strongest class. Not really a situation where there's not a quarterback to move up for. If you want an edge guy, you can get one at 10. You don't have to move up to 7. You can get one at 11, 12, 13, 14. That's how many there are. So that would be my question. I would love for the Jets to move back, but what is somebody trading up for? Unless somebody's bluffing about Shedeur, unless there's a team that wants him. And again, you've now got McShay saying New Orleans doesn't want him at 9 or 40. You've got McShay saying Pittsburgh doesn't want him at 21. You had Albert Breer the other day saying he couldn't find a GM that wanted him in the first round. If all of that's true, nobody's trading up for him. But we've seen before, folks, where, insiders and analysts will come out, definitively and say, here's a thing that will not happen. And then it happens. And they go, oh, I got smoked. I thought I had a good source giving me good info, but they were laying a smoke screen and I fell for it. So that stuff happens. We'll see where Shedeur goes. It's hard to imagine a guy that some people have as QB1 on their board could go in the second round. But again, if you're saying that the class is that weak, that's where it gets interesting. Indy Jets says DT at 7 would make no sense. Well, it would depend on the DT. Listen, as Scott said, you've got the 3 guys at the top, right? You've got Cam Ward, you've got Abdul Carter, you've got Travis Hunter. These are your 3 you're sort of locked in, so to speak, at the top 3. But Mason Graham, there are some people who feel that if you add Graham and Gianti to that list, those are the 5 best players in this class. So if the Jets go with a best player available approach, and Gianti, let's say Gianti does go to Oakland, and then the Jets are looking at their board going, well, Mason Graham is the highest graded guy by a lot. And Quinnen Williams, there is the issue that there are some similarities between him and Quinnen Williams. But you know what? If you're a defensive head coach and you're a defensive genius, find a way to make it work. Like, oh no, we just gave you a top 5 player to add to Quinnen Williams. Like, find a way to make them work. And I'm sure they could do that. But as I said last week on the show, I think the fact that JJ's coming back from a major injury and all you've got outside of that is Will McDonald in terms of proven edge guys. I think edge is a lot more likely than folks are saying. And again, this is the point that I was making last week before McShay jumped in today and said everybody wants Walker and 7 teams could take an edge, including the Jets. Thomas again says Jalen Noel, Iowa State wide receiver in the second, Darian Porter. You wouldn't be an Iowa State by chance, would you, would you, Thomas? But no, even that aside, that would be a good haul. Really good players at positions. Well, Porter, I expect the Jets. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they took a corner. I would be surprised if they took one that early, because you could just give Stevens big money. I'm assuming you're going to give Sauce big money, so it's kind of why would you go out and do that? Vegas has Tyree Wilson and Crosby. They do Wild Wave. That's a good call. I don't know what their contract situations are, and I'm not 100% sure. McShay mentioned Vegas, but I'm fairly sure because he mentioned at least one team before he said and the Jets, and I thought it was Vegas. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was another team at 4 or 5. But either way, the way McShay sees it, he says, don't be surprised if 7 edge guys go in the top 17. I had Scott before we left there name some of his favorite guys in the class. We do this every year. This year was tough. Doing the my guy thing. A few guys at every position who we like, who maybe everyone's not familiar with. I understand. I say all the time, right? I don't pretend to be a damn coach or a scout or whatever. I'm a football fan who watches a billion hours of football, and I just pick out players I like. Let's see. Oh yeah, absolute Thomas. They'll be getting DBs. As I said, I expect a corner. I definitely expect a safety, if not 2. Well, 2 would be a little rich unless they had some picks, but I don't disagree that corner will be a priority. I just don't know that corner will be a priority that early on. Wild Wave hopping in here says he mentioned New England, Jacksonville, Vegas, us, and his floor is Carolina. So did he say okay? That's what I wasn't sure about was the New England thing. Jacksonville, I thought they said Genty, but that's the problem. You listen to 2 or 3 draft pods in the same day, and I forget who said what. But so I'm just going to throw out some names out there for each position. Some position more names than others because there are so many guys that are such a deep class, and there's a bunch of guys that I like. But let's start off quarterback. These are guys that you can have mid round. In fact, I'm going to say I've got 3 quarterbacks here. One guy I'm going to guess goes in the round 3 or 4 range. The other guy is going to be a day 3, 5, 6, 7 guy, and the other guy is most likely a UDFA, but maybe he goes to a team like the Jets because the Jets did have him in for a visit. So the 3 quarterbacks I'm going to go with: Will Howard, Ohio State, obviously won the national championship. Not a lot of people are as high on him as I think they should be. So Aaron Glenn talked about he wants a proven winner, right? Well, who's a bigger winner than the guy who just won the national championship? Will Howard can he protects the football, uses his legs, big time throws and big time spots, and again, proven winner. Looked good at K-State before he transferred. So I think he's a guy that would be on the Jets' radar if they're looking to get a developmental guy. My preference, if I had it my way, if I'm GM for a day, come round 5, round 6, maybe I wouldn't wait till round 7, but no later than round 6, I'm grabbing Brady Cook out of Mizzou. If you listen to this show, I've been talking him up for a little while now. Discussed him with Emery Hunt the other day on the show. Here's a guy who's got plenty of arm to make the throws. Really, really athletic guy. Ran for a ton of yards at Mizzou. Played top-notch competition. Beat some really tough teams. Proven winner. Protects the ball. Although I will say, I can't remember if it was last year's film or the year before. I felt like he had a lot of balls he threw that could have been picked that weren't, but he appeared to have cleaned that up. And then Cam Miller. Again, you're talking proven winner. Yes, small program, North Dakota State. But watch him against Colorado week 1 this year. You'll see just fearless guy. Fearless, not afraid to make any throw. Another guy who can run really well. Picked up some big gains in that game, and not a major program. But if you're talking about a day 3 developmental guy, those would be or that'd be the guy that I would go with. Cam Miller. Running back, there were 50 of them. Like now, it almost feels silly picking 5 or 6 guys that I really like because there's probably 15 or 20. I had the same issue with defensive tackle. So I went with this list. DJ Giddens, K-State, really good player, good all-around guy, really physical back. RJ Harvey can make guys miss, really good speed. I don't know what he tested at, but I know he plays fast. But Quinn Allen, if you told me the Jets were going to take a back in this class and I had to guess and give it my best guess who it was going to be, and I don't know that they will take a back, but LaQuinn Allen would be my guess. Because Aaron Glenn, I have a feeling he's going to be a lot like Bill Parcells in not wanting to tolerate rookie mistakes. And when it comes to running backs, the biggest mistakes you're worried about with your rookies is not being able to pick up the blitz. LaQuinn Allen, phenomenal in that area. Shunderick Powell, Central Arkansas. I've talked about him a couple of different times. Explosive, can get to the outside. Runs with a low center of gravity. Not the biggest guy, but he will run people over, and just explosive. You see so many big runs out of him. And I forget what he squatted. Somebody tweeted that out a few weeks ago. I don't know if it was a pro day or a workout. Guys squatting like 1,000,000 pounds, which isn't surprising because you see him lower that shoulder and just knock guys over. And Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Arizona running back. Have to mention this guy. I know I've talked about him in the past. Other people have. Really impressed a lot of folks by showing up at the East-West Shrine Bowl and winning MVP had a couple days. He played one game this year, played the season opener, had a phenomenal game against New Mexico for Arizona, New Mexico State. That was when T-Mac went for 250 or whatever it was. But Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, really elusive guy, stop on a dime, change direction. He's probably probably another day 3 guy. I would gladly have that guy on my roster. And again, I could pick another 5 running backs. Really, a really good group. Wide receiver could have easily, honestly, all 3 Colorado guys. I picked Will Shepherd, but if you'd said I had to pick, if I had to pick Horn, I would no problem. Wester, no problem. Any of those guys I would take as a day 3 pick. But Bo Collins, again, another player you would have heard come up when me and Emory Hunt talked about him. Emory Hunt loves him. He's got him thinks even a lot more of him than I do. And I think he's a good player. I liked him a lot at Clemson. He's a guy, and it was interesting to hear Emory say what he said, because when I watched Bo Collins, I would always think to myself, why is this guy not more productive? Like every time I see him targeted, clean routes, good hands, but the numbers just weren't there. And talking to Emory about it, he says, look, I haven't rated high because he's just not getting the ball. He's constantly open all the time. And just I think I watched him one game this year. Like Clemson 2-3 years ago, I watched a bunch of them. And I was like, wow, this guy's going to be a good one. He goes to Notre Dame, doesn't do a whole lot. So he's never had that big breakout year. But his film suggests he could be one of those guys that you'll look back at and say, why wasn't he more productive in college? Look how good he is as a pro. Couple other wide receivers. Chimere Dike, the wide receiver. I talked about him around Senior Bowl time. Liked him at Wisconsin. Transferred to Florida. Didn't do a whole lot there. And he's another one right there with Collins. I would bet he could develop to be a better pro than he is collegiate. And then Isaiah Nair, who I've also talked about, Nebraska kid. He went from Wyoming to Texas to Nebraska. Big dude, really big dude. 6'4", just big-bodied guy, and runs in the 4.4s. Really good deep threat at Wyoming a couple years ago, averaged 20 yards a catch. Then he goes to Texas and gets hurt. Then he goes to Nebraska this year, where the quarterback situation is iffy at best and doesn't produce a whole lot. But he's a guy I really like. And Elikai Manor, another wide receiver from Stanford. As I've said in the past, if you're looking for a guy who's going to catch every single ball that comes his way, and John Paul Richardson, another guy you could lump in there, who I've talked about in the past, the Oklahoma State transfer who moved on to TCU. Both those guys, they just catch absolutely every single ball that comes their way, and they make some of the most incredible catches you'll ever see. If you can get a guy like that, I think John Paul Richardson probably goes undrafted. Manor is a guy who probably, I would say, a mid-round pick, could be late 2, early 3 at best. But I think his worst case scenario is to be a mid-round guy. Moving on to tight end, Oronde Gadsden Jr., or the second, third, I forget what it is. I would love to have this guy in the Jets roster, and I would just love for him to be, let that guy score some game winners against the Dolphins. That would be fantastic. But wide receiver a couple years ago, transition to tight end, played big slot, played tight end. You can move him around a bit. Not afraid to block. Not the fastest guy, but again, at a tight end, you're not going to have a lot of tight ends running in the 4.4s. Next guy, Jalen Conyers. If you follow myself and Dom C on Twitter, you would have seen the two of us talking about him the other day. In fact, if you watched me and Dylan do our mock the other day, I forget what round we got him in, but day 3, I was like, let's grab this dude, grab Jalen Conyers. Good all-around player. He can block, catch, he can run. I think he's a guy who he may go earlier than a lot of. I think he's good enough to go earlier than what a lot of people are projecting. Let's put it that way. So Conyers, Gunnar Helm, also another a Texas guy who Scott had mentioned. Another guy who can do a little bit of everything. I know that the way the league is trending, you see more and more tight ends who don't block, and they're just sort of slot receivers, and that drives me nuts. You got to be able to. I hate when you have a guy that has to come off the field every time you do this or that. That brings me to Ben Urasek. You've probably heard me in the past on the show. Tight end out of Georgia, transferred from Stanford, really big target. I think he's listed at 6'5". He looks like he's damn 6'9". When you hit him over the middle and he's outstretched, those long limbs, huge target, could be an immediate factor in the red zone. Very good, not great, but very good blocker. So he's a guy that you can get on the field right away. Tackle, Ariante Ursary, he's one of the few guys I've got on this list who are probably projected first rounders. But I mention him, A, because I've been a big fan of his game, and B, some people say he's a third rounder. So we'll see. I said for quite a bit I thought he could go in the first. I thought he'd be a good late first rounder. If you're Kansas City and you stay put at 32, I think Ursary would make sense. But there are a lot of folks who seem to be saying there's no way, and that I got to be crazy. Marcus Bowe out of Purdue, Embo or Bowe, I've heard it pronounced several different ways. Here's a guy that I again got onto a couple years ago. Thought that he moved really well at tackle. Didn't miss his target a lot when he was asked to get on the move. But there are some people feel he projects to guard, and maybe he does. There's a lot of tackles in this class that people are projecting to guard. So we'll see if he ends up joining that group. Anthony Belton, there's another guy you would have seen me and Dom C talk about a few weeks ago. Dom's a big fan of his. I thought Belton was a little bit disappointing this year, only because I thought so highly of him. I thought he had a chance to come out of this class, to come out of the season. It's like OT1, like at least no worse than top 5. I don't hear a lot of people putting him in that class, but I do think he's a good player. He's huge. He'll stop guys in their tracks. So I wouldn't mind seeing him as a mid-late round pick. I would imagine he'll be a mid-round pick. He won't be a late round. He shouldn't be. And then John Williams out of Cincinnati. A lot of folks saying undrafted free agent. Now here's a guy who's got a couple years starting experience. He's got all the prototypical size that you look for. I believe he only gave up 1 or 2 sacks in his college career, and I thought he looked good in pass pro. I thought he anchored well, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of love for him. And look, sometimes guys are productive, and for whatever reason the measurements aren't there, or teams don't like something they see, and those guys go undrafted. Now, I think Williams, being that he's a tackle, I'd be surprised if he doesn't get picked. It's a matter of, is he a round 5 guy, round 7 guy? We'll have to wait and see. At guard, Donovan Jackson, absolute monster. I know he's a guy who people did talk about. Could he go in the first round, especially given the way he played as a senior? I don't know that he will. Miles Frazier out of LSU, Luke Kandra out of Cincy, and his teammate, D'Artagnan Tinsley. He's a guy, he's ranked like a billionth on the PFN draft website. They have him as really being useless, if you ask me, when you're rating a guy that low. I'm not here to say this guy's going to be a superstar, but if he's out there as a UDFA, I would bring him into camp and give him a look. I thought he had some really impressive reps playing opposite Kandra at guard. Just a few centers. Drew Kendall, we've talked about him, of course, son of Pete Kendall, former Jet center. And Jacob Bayer, Arkansas State kid. Thought he was really fundamentally sound. Again, really good anchor. Had some up and down reps at the Senior Bowl, which you kind of expect going from Arkansas State up to play against the big boys. But he had some good reps, some impressive moments. D end Ashton Gillott out of Louisville. I've tweeted about him a couple times recently, if I'm not mistaken. He's a guy who, solid against the run, solid against the pass. If you're talking guys to get after the quarterback, Jared Ivey and Ja Joyner. Ivey out of Ole Miss. That Ole Miss D-line is so good. And Ja Joyner out of Minnesota. Princely Umanmielen. This is a guy, again, 2 years ago when I first watched him, I believe it was as a freshman, I was like, this guy's a first-round pick. Now I'm seeing, if you could get this guy in the 3rd round, you talk about value. For what he's put on film, I'll tell you what, he's one of those guys that puzzles me that I see him ranked as low as I do sometimes. And then Ahmed Hassanin, the edge rusher, I've mentioned him in the past, out of Boise State. I feel like he could be sort of a JFM type replacement, a little bit inside, a little bit outside. Great motor, gets to the quarterback. I think he could be a nice addition. I think he will be a day 3 pick. D tackle. This was the toughest one, of course, because there are a million of them in this class. So I named, how many did I list? I think I listed 5. I did list 5. Thomas says super sleeper, Luke Kendra. Yeah, I just meant, I don't know if you put that up before or after I mentioned that. Real quick, in the chat here, Thomas, what do I think of Tyler Shuck? The only reason I haven't mentioned Shuck, I'm trying not to repeat too many names. He was one of my guys going into the Senior Bowl, and I'll tell you what, I liked him going into the Senior Bowl, and the film I've watched on him since then, I like him even more. Ball placement, absolutely fantastic. The concerns with him, very obvious: age and injuries, ton of injuries. Where at some point you're like, okay, if you're gonna gamble on a quarterback who's had as many surgeries as he has, it's gotta be day 3, even though he's got day 2 talent. Some people say day 1 talent. If he was a year or 2 younger and minus those surgeries, he's probably QB2 in this class. So yeah, he was my guy going into, or the 2 quarterbacks I listed going into the Senior Bowl. I believe I listed Shuck and Jackson Dart. So the DTs, these 2 guys are, I think they're listed one right behind the other in the player rankings for PFN. I would love the Jets to get both because they need some help next to Quinnen Williams. Jamari Caldwell, JJ Pegues. You would have heard me talk about both these guys, but Pegues, a couple months ago, I believe, talking to Dylan about him. The athleticism for a man his size is absolutely phenomenal. Scored 7 rushing touchdowns this year. You want to plug that guy in at fullback on the goal line or let him even run the ball on the goal line, I would have no problem with that. Jamari Caldwell, his lateral movement for a guy who weighs 325, 330 is absolutely phenomenal. He's not quite as big as Snacks Harrison, but that's what he reminds me of a little bit. Deion Walker. Let's talk about Deion Walker, folks. I've talked about him many times before because he was my favorite defensive player coming into this class. Deion Walker, the defensive tackle out of Kentucky, listed at 340, 350, whatever it may be. And he, this year, looked terrible. He was completely ineffective. Whereas you go back to last year, and he was one of one unicorn. You look at the combination of size, agility, awareness, being able to locate guys in the backfield, like nobody else could do what he did. And that's why coming into the season, I was like, that dude's my top defensive player in the country. He's going to be a top 10 pick. I thought he was going to be a top 10 pick. And as I often do, if there's a guy that I have watched a ton of in previous years, I kind of wait till a little later in the process, that final year, because I feel like, I've watched this guy play several hundred reps. I don't need to see more, but I'll watch some. And then I turned on his film this year, a few months ago, and I was like, what happened to my guy? What happened to Deion Walker? He looked nothing like the guy he did previously. Turns out, rumor has it, he was playing with a bad back this season. Well, if you weigh 350 pounds and you have a bad back, and your job is to grab other 300-pound men and toss them aside, I hate to say it, I mean, but he could be a round 4, round 5 guy. If the back issue is something that resolves itself and you get him that late, even round 3, that's tremendous value. Tremendous value. Like I said, to me, top 10 talent, if not for the health issues. So Deion Walker, wish him well. Hope he goes early. We'll see what happens there. And he is Peebles. Virginia Tech, not the biggest tackle, but he can get skinny, slip between blockers because he is so quick, explosive off the snap. He will be disruptive in the backfield. Nazir Stackhouse, I mentioned him on the forums on JetNation the other day. I feel like he's a guy that just got forgotten about. And maybe it's because he was a good player in college, but the expectations were that he was going to be great. And you see all these great DTs coming out of Georgia. And Nazir Stackhouse, rather than being a great tackle, was a very good one. Real quick in the chat here, Wildwave says he would trade Brees for a 3. And see, well, I think that's going to depend. I mean, if they want to move Brees, I mean, they did just exercise his or they're going to exercise his option, so that's unlikely. But if you're going to move him, I mean, Travion's not a bad player. The thing is, there are a million backs in this class. Maybe I think what you do, because we've talked about this as well on the forums of JetNation. I think if you're going to trade Brees, you do it after this year, especially now you've exercised the option. I don't think his trade value would be lower than it is now. It will never be lower. If this O-line plays well and you keep defenses on their toes with the fact that you're going to have multiple backs on the field who can run the ball at the same time with a quarterback who can run the ball, and you let Brees Hall break out and have himself a 1,400-yard season, then you're going to maximize and you can trade him after that. Trading him now, I just feel like you're shooting yourself in the foot in terms of value. But running backs getting moved isn't the most surprising thing, but I think they genuinely do like Brees and what they have in him, and I would like for him to hang around, at least to not end up giving him away. Essentially, the last DT I'm mentioning here, Davin Van, NC State, another guy that I like. I've mentioned him in the past. I like that he's solid against the run, solid, just good all around player. A guy who you bring him in as a rookie, he's not going to be a liability in any phase of the game, and he'll be able to get rolling right away because there's really not a lot he can't do. Again, he's not going to do it at an elite level, but he'll be a serviceable player in a couple of different capacities. Linebackers, Barrett Carter. I'm sure I mentioned him the other day. I can't remember if I talked to Dylan about him before or after our show, because this is the problem, folks. Whether it's me and Dylan doing our show or me hopping on Scott's show to do a mailbag, or tonight was an exception because Scott was at work, but sometimes we'll talk about the Jets for an hour before we get on the show and talk about the Jets for an hour. And then sometimes I'm like, man, did I make that comment on the air or off the air? So I apologize if I'm repeating myself. But I did say to Dylan, Barrett Carter's a guy I remember a year or so ago. I believe it was right after last year's draft, as people talking about him as a top 5, well, maybe not top 5, but certainly a top 15, top 10 first round linebacker. And now he's sort of graded as a second, third round guy. I would gladly take him. Heat-seeking missile, sideline to sideline guy, big-time hitter. Danny Stutzman, another guy I really like. Now, Stutzman, a little bit of a liability against the pass. Maybe he's your first, second down linebacker when, in run situations, because he is an absolute monster against the run. Cody Lindenberg, a little bit better in coverage in my opinion, than Stutzman, but also really good against the run. Colin Oliver, Oklahoma State. I've seen him listed as a linebacker. I've seen him listed as a D-end, edge, whatever you want to call it. I like him as an edge. I think he's just one of those guys. Every now and then you're watching a team and there's a guy who's not highly thought of, or at least a name you're not hearing very much, and they just make play after play. And every time you watch a game, there's a sack, there's a TFL, there's a forced fumble, there's another sack. And to me, that was Colin Oliver. So I think I'm in year 3 of watching him now. And every time I pop in some film of him, he's making plays and looking really impressive. Nick Martin, I've mentioned, another guy really good in coverage, good off-ball linebacker, probably another day 3 guy. Derek Jackson also threw him on there, the Kentucky linebacker, because he's another guy. Not so much explosive impact plays, but just steady Eddie, consistent. Every time I watch Kentucky, I'm like, there's another tackle. There's another tackle. And we're not talking 5, 7, 8 yards down the field. He's getting a lot of stops, a lot of tackles around the line of scrimmage. Derek Jackson, probably a UDFA type. Just a few more here. We'll go with a few safeties. Andrew Makuba, we'll go right over him because Scott broke him down for us a little bit. Billy Bowman. Now, there are some issues with Bowman and missed tackles, but he is a ball hawk. He gives the Jets something they haven't had in a very long time, in getting them a safety who can actually go and get the football. Because it's been a very long time since they've had that. Even, spare me the box scores and looking at the fact that Jordan Whitehead had a bunch of picks a few years ago. We talked recently about how that was, we have 3 in one game that really padded his numbers out for the rest of the season. Last safety, talked about him with Dylan last week. JJ Roberts out of Marshall. Like this guy a lot. Athletic, comes downhill hard against the run, can cover the deep back end of the field, gets back there. Now, look, you'd like to see him intercept more footballs. Um, I mean, God, between the Stevens and Sauce combined for like one pick last year, and then if you bring in a guy like Roberts who had 14 PBUs and no interceptions, that's a little bit. God, three guys who can't intercept the football. That's not really something you want. But again, Bowman is a guy who can. Then at safety, just listed three guys. Noel Williams, a guy who I think is not getting enough attention. I feel like early in the year I heard his name as a mid round guy, but since then, not really anybody talking about him. I like him for Cal. Kobe Bryant, that dude plays so much bigger than he is. I looked at his listed size earlier. I forget what it was, but anytime I remind myself and look him up, I'm always like, he's a lot smaller than I expect because he plays big. He hits hard. There are times where you'll mistake him for a safety and think he would just lay dudes out from time to time. And then Za Frazier, UTSA. This is a guy, just great length. Again, when you have a guy who's checking in that tall, he's like 6'3". Maybe not the best lateral movement, but he is able to cover guys deep down the field. I think he's a guy who could go in the middle rounds. I didn't pull his numbers up. I forget how many picks he had last year. I want to say he had 3 or 4, but I could be wrong on that. But Za Frazier, Kobe Bryant, Noel Williams, those are a few corners to keep your eyes on. And that's everybody. That's everybody I wrote down. Like I said, folks, if I jotted down all the DTs and all the running backs, I'd be here until the draft kicked off because there are so many that I like. It's just deep edge, same thing. Edge, running back, DT, insane depth, safety, which Scott and I talked about. Let's see in the chat. Oh, Rich hopping in here. Sorry if late. If both tight end and O-line available, who you got? So if you're talking round one, Rich, what we were saying is, or what I was saying is, having said last week that fans need to be a little bit more prepared for the possibility of an edge rusher, and now Todd McShay saying today that he expects a lot of edge rushers to go early on. That wouldn't surprise me, but if it's between the tight end and O-line, I would say O-line because, you're placing all of your trust in Justin Fields, and I understand he needs weapons, but I think this class is even lighter. Well, by a wide margin. It's a supply and demand. You are not going to have nearly as easy a time finding a starting tackle later on in this class than you will finding a tight end. You're going to find tight ends on day 2 and 3 who are going to start for you. You can't say the same about tackle. So based on wanting to build around Fields, wanting to protect him, get him weapons, I would say if it's between tight end and tackle, you go tackle, and then you get the tight end later on, the wide receiver later on, and you're still solidifying the trenches because it ain't going to be max. Oh, and sorry, somebody asked earlier, why is Michael Clemens still on the roster? Because it's April. I don't know if the Jets have tricked themselves into believing they can get something for him in trade, even if it's a conditional 7, anything. I don't see that happening. But consensus says Membu. Yeah, and that has been the case for a while, Rich. It seems to be that most people are saying Membu, but McShay today was saying, don't be surprised if there's a run on edges early on. He included the Jets in that conversation. And it does make sense if you think about it, Rich. I pointed out earlier. All you've got is Will McDonald and a banged up JJ coming back with a ruptured Achilles. So edge is thin. And you've got a defensive minded head coach who just dominated on defense with guys who can get to the quarterback. So I think it'll be a lot more likely than we were considering. A few weeks ago, I can't remember when I first started thinking about, maybe they take Shamar. That might have been, let's say a month and a half ago, I wasn't even thinking about edge in the first round. I was thinking about great value in round 2 or 3 because there's going to be some good ones out there. Rich, how insane if we see running back. Running back, here's the thing. There was with Chad Kruger, the NFL.com guy, or it might have been Zerline, but one of them that did a mock a few months ago or a couple months ago, and they had Genti to the Jets at 7, which I at the time I thought crazy. Here's the only reason it's not completely crazy: the Jets aren't winning anything this year, and they have to know that. So if they went into this and said, "Look, we know we're going to try to move Brees. Um, let's go ahead and get Genti. They can split carries, so you're not giving Genti a ton of miles, but you're giving Brees a chance to showcase himself. Maybe you look to trade him around the deadline to a contender looking for a running back, which could happen. And then you're building Genti, or you're grabbing Genti to build the offense for the future, because that's really what this is about. This isn't a win now team. I saw somebody saying earlier on Twitter about, you have to take this guy. You've got to get an impact guy now. Time for that was last year, when you didn't know Aaron Rodgers was going to be as bad as he was, when you didn't know the offensive everything was going to be as bad as it was. Last year was you draft a day one guy now, and they didn't do that, right? That was my biggest argument behind Bowers, when it was like, oh, left tackle is more important than tight end. Yeah, I get that, but getting a day one contributor when you're a win now team is more important than a backup developmental guy. And by developmental, I mean like spend that year on the bench developing, not that he wasn't ready to play. But they're no longer in that position. You're no longer like, you need a guy now to step in and start because you're ready to win. That's not the case. You can bring in a guy to back up and develop and come along. And Genti could be that guy, or there's a few different directions they could go in this class with this pick. But whatever they're going to do, we're going to know. And what time is it? It's almost 2 a.m. here. So 40 some hours from now, we might know in 46, 47 hours. Something in that ballpark. I don't even know what time the damn draft kicks off. I just know it's late here. It's time for me to go. Thank you all for tuning in and listening in. Thanks to Scott Mason for joining us. Talk a little bit about the Darren Mougey press conference and how the Jets might approach this draft. Is it going to be edge? Is it going to be tackle? Is it going to be receiver? Listen, I still love Ted McMillan, but he ain't the pick. I think, what was it today? Same pod. McShay shocked me, hurt my heart a little bit. Said he did his top 300. He's got Tedero McMillan ranked as his 50th best player. That's crazy. And he did say there are teams that are in that ballpark, but there are some teams that really love him and love his game. So, actually, one last question here from Rich. Don't worry about it, Rich. Keeps asking questions. What position would we need? What if we're talking? If we're talking right now with our free agent signing, what position would we need? Or do you mean what we need now based on what they've already signed? I mean, look, I know they added a safety in Andre Cisco, who I really like, and they've got Tony Adams, but you still got to add another safety back there. You don't have a proven, established guy. You need to get somebody who can go get the football, even though I think Cisco might be able to do that. DT, again, get somebody to plug in next to Quinnen who's going to be there for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years, not another dude who's going to be there for a year and then go, because that's what just keeps happening. Campbell, I just don't see it. I don't see it. As Scott said at the top, there are some teams who believe that both Membu and Campbell are better suited to play guard. We'll see if that, I mean, as I've said many times in the past, if I'm drafting a tweener, a guard tackle tweener, I'm working him at tackle first and prove to me you can't play tackle before I move you to guard. So Campbell should at least get some looks there. I don't think he's going to be on the Jets. I don't think he's going to be an option for the Jets. I think it's going to be, if it's going to be alignment, I would think Membu, but I think it's going to be edge. Edge would be my number one guess. Tight end with Warren, and then Membu. And I'm going on the Spielman having said before he got this Jets job that he thought Warren was a top 10 pick. He thinks he's a top 10 talent. Well, if you believe he's a top 10 talent and you're picking him the top 10, he fills a need, helps that young quarterback, I can see it happening. But the more I talk, or the more, as I said, having mentioned it last week, I think edge might be a thing. And then hearing McShay today kind of reinforcing the thought that I was having, because the more I thought about it, I was like, I think Aaron Glenn's going to want somebody to get after the quarterback for him, because he's only got one guy to do it. And if JJ's not 100%, teams will just double Will McDonald, and that'll be the end of it. I mean, of course, you got Quinnen coming up the middle, but you need more firepower in trying to get there. So we'll see who they get if they get there. I'm going to go live for the draft. I'm going to try to do every pick. And I say that realizing I'll probably hate myself at some point while I'm doing it, but I will give it a shot. Did it last year. We'll try it again this year. Hopefully many of you hop on and check it out. You see the Twitter handle right there at JN Radio Glenn. Give me a follow on Twitter and give us a follow come draft day, draft time, and watch it with us. I know, look, you're gonna have ESPN on. I get that, but have a Jets fan on. Listen to a Jets fan talk about it with you and talk you through it. Have a good one, Jets fans.